The mining ship Prometheus shuddered as it broke through the atmosphere of Kepler 442c, its hull groaning under the stress of atmospheric entry. Captain Sarah Chun gripped her harness tighter, watching the readouts flicker between green and amber warnings. This was supposed to be a routine extraction mission. Rare Earth elements detected from orbital scans. No signs of intelligent life. Standard 3-week operation. Touchdown in 60 seconds, called out Navigator Torres from his station. Through the viewports, Sarah could see the planet's surface rushing up to meet them. Endless forests of silver-blue trees stretching to every horizon, broken only by crystalline formations that jutted from the landscape like frozen lightning. The ship settled with a final thump that rattled every bolt and rivet. Chief Engineer Martinez immediately began his post-landing diagnostics while Dr. Elena Vasquez, their xenobiologist, practically vibrated with excitement in her seat. Preliminary scans show incredible biodiversity, Elena announced, her fingers dancing across her tablet. These crystal formations aren't just geological. They're showing organized molecular structures that suggest some kind of biological integration with the mineral deposits. Sarah unbuckled herself and stretched, feeling her joints pop after the long journey from Earth. Remember, this is strictly a mining operation. We extract what we came for and leave. No extended biological surveys. Elena's face fell slightly, but she nodded. The crew had been through this dance before on dozens of worlds. Humanity's expansion into the galaxy was driven by necessity, not curiosity. Earth was dying, choking on its own industrial excess, and every mission counted toward finding resources that might buy their home world more time. Chin to all teams, Sarah spoke in her comm unit. We're green for surface operations. Martinez, get the mining equipment operational. Torres, establish our perimeter sensors. Elena, you have 6 hours for preliminary biological assessment. Enough to ensure we're not disrupting any protected ecosystem classifications. The crew moved with practiced efficiency. Sarah watched them through the ship's cameras as they deployed across the landing site, their environmental suits gleaming white against the alien landscape. The air was breathable according to their sensors, but protocol demanded full protection until they were certain. It was Torres who first spotted the cave system. Captain, you need to see this. His voice crackled through the comm. There's an opening in the crystal formation about 2 clicks north of our position. The mineral density readings are off the charts. Sarah pulled on her own suit and stepped outside for the first time. The air had a strange quality to it. Not quite thin, but somehow charged like the moments before a thunderstorm. The silver-blue trees towered overhead, their leaves making a sound like wind chimes in the gentle breeze. She found Torres standing before what looked like a natural cathedral carved from living crystal. The opening was easily large enough for their equipment, and the formations inside glowed with their own internal light, blues and purples and greens that pulsed in slow, hypnotic rhythms. These readings can't be right, Torres muttered, checking his scanner again. The concentration of rare Earth elements in there. It's like striking the mother lode. Sarah studied the cave mouth. Something felt wrong about it, though she couldn't put her finger on what. The pulsing of the crystals seemed almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat or breathing. Elena, I need you over here. The xenobiologist arrived within minutes, her excitement palpable even through her suit's visor. She immediately began taking readings, her equipment humming and chirping as it analyzed the cave's structure. This is incredible, she breathed. The crystal formations aren't just mineral deposits. They're some kind of hybrid organic-inorganic matrix. The bioelectrical activity suggests they might be alive, or at least part of something alive. Define alive, Sarah said, though she suspected she didn't want to hear the answer. The electromagnetic patterns are consistent with neural activity, not just random electrical discharge, organized, purposeful signals. Captain, I think this entire cave system might be some kind of massive organism. Before Sarah could respond, Martinez's voice crackled through the comm from back at the ship. Captain, we've got company. 3 objects just entered our sensor range, moving fast and low. They're not following any flight pattern I recognize. Sarah felt her stomach drop. First contact scenarios were supposed to be handled by specialized diplomatic corps, not mining crews. Everyone back to the ship now. Torres, secure the equipment. But as they turned to head back, the cave behind them changed. The pulsing light intensified, shifting from the gentle blues and greens to urgent reds and oranges. A sound emerged from deep within the crystal formation. Not quite a voice, but something that conveyed distress so clearly that every human instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. "Wait," Elena called out, her voice tight with concern. "Something's happening. The bioelectrical activity just spiked. Whatever's in there, it's in pain." The three objects Martinez had detected came into view, sleek, organic-looking craft that moved with the fluid grace of living creatures. They circled the human landing site once, then settled to the ground with barely a whisper of displaced air. Beings emerged from the craft, and Sarah felt her breath catch. They were beautiful in an otherworldly way, tall and elegant, with scales that shifted color like oil on water, and eyes that held an intelligence that was unmistakably ancient. Dragons, her mind supplied, though these creatures stood upright and wore what looked like ceremonial armor made from the same crystal that formed the cave. The largest of them approached, moving with a dignity that made Sarah instinctively straighten her posture. When it spoke, its voice resonated with harmonics that her suit's translator struggled to process. "Humans," it said, the word carrying undertones of both recognition and sadness. "We had hoped this world would remain hidden longer. I am Elder Thyraxis of the Crystal Singers. You have unknowingly trespassed upon sacred ground." Sarah activated her suit's diplomatic protocols, automatically recording everything for potential first contact documentation. "I am Captain Sarah Chun of the Earth Consortium vessel Prometheus. We detected no signs of intelligent life during our orbital surveys. We meant no offense." Thyraxis tilted his great head, his scales shifting to deeper blues and purples. "The young ones mask their presence well when they sleep. But your arrival has disturbed the binding caves, where our children rest during their first century of growth. The one within is awakening prematurely, and that awakening is traumatic." The sound from the cave intensified, definitely distressed now, almost like crying. Elena stepped forward, her scientific curiosity overriding her caution. "The cave system, it's not just alive, it's a nursery. The crystals are some kind of protective matrix for developing young." "Indeed," Thyraxis confirmed. "The crystals grow with them, providing nutrients and protection. To disturb a binding cave during the deep sleep can cause permanent psychological damage to the young one within. In some cases, it can be fatal." The crying from the cave grew louder, and Sarah felt something twist in her chest. It sounded so young, so frightened and confused. "What can we do?" "We'll leave immediately if that helps." Thyraxis's expression grew even more grave. "Leaving now would be worse. The young one has already begun to wake. To suddenly lose the new presence it has sensed would create a trauma bond that could last centuries. Someone must stay and guide it through the awakening process." "How long does that take?" Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected the answer wouldn't be good. "Several of your months, at minimum. The awakening cannot be rushed without risking the young one's sanity." Sarah looked back toward her ship, thinking of their mission timeline, their limited supplies, and the reports they'd have to file. Staying here for months was impossible. But as another wave of distressed crying echoed from the cave, she found herself walking toward the crystal formation instead of away from it. "Sarah, no," Elena called after her. "We don't know what's in there. The electromagnetic field alone could be dangerous to humans." But Sarah was already at the cave mouth, her suit's lights casting strange shadows on the crystal walls. The crying was definitely coming from deeper inside, echoing off the crystalline formations that pulsed with increasing urgency. "Captain," Thyraxis's voice was urgent now. "If you enter the binding cave, The young one will imprint upon you as its first contact with the waking world. That bond cannot be broken without severe psychological trauma. You would be responsible for its well-being until it reaches maturity. Sarah paused at the threshold. Behind her, her crew waited for orders. In front of her, something young and frightened cried out in the darkness. The responsible thing would be to step back, to find some other solution that didn't involve risking her career and her crew's mission. Instead, she stepped forward into the crystal cave. The inside was even more magnificent than she'd imagined. The walls were lined with formations that looked like frozen music, all curves and spirals that seemed to dance in the pulsing light. The air itself seemed to sing with harmonics that made her bones resonate. She followed the sound deeper into the cave, her suit's lights revealing chamber after chamber of crystal beauty. And then, in what seemed to be the heart of the formation, she found it. The baby dragon was no larger than a house cat, covered in scales that shifted through the entire spectrum of color like a living prism. It was curled in a depression in the crystal floor that seemed perfectly formed to cradle its small body. Its eyes, enormous and liquid and holding an intelligence that made Sarah's breath catch, were fixed on her with an expression of desperate hope. When their eyes met, something happened that Sarah would never be able to adequately describe. It felt like a door opening in her mind, like suddenly being able to hear a frequency that had always been there, but never noticed. The baby dragon's emotions flooded through her: confusion, fear, loneliness, and underneath it all, a desperate need for connection and comfort. Without thinking, Sarah knelt beside the crystal depression and extended her gloved hand. The baby dragon immediately pressed against it, its small body trembling with relief. Through the strange connection, she could feel its racing heartbeat beginning to slow, its terror subsiding into something like cautious hope. "It's okay," she whispered, knowing somehow that it could understand her intent, if not her words. "You're not alone." The baby dragon made a sound. Not quite a chirp, not quite a purr, but something that spoke of gratitude and desperate attachment. Its tiny claws gripped her suit with surprising strength, as if afraid she might disappear if it let go. Sarah realized she was crying inside her helmet. This small creature had been alone and terrified in the dark, and her presence was the first comfort it had known in its brief existence. How could she walk away from that? "Captain," Elena's voice came through her comm, sounding distant and worried. "Your bio readings are all over the place. What's happening in there?" Sarah looked down at the small dragon clinging to her hand, its eyes never leaving her face. Through their strange connection, she could feel its absolute trust, its complete faith that she would protect it from whatever had frightened it so badly. "I think," Sarah said quietly, "we're going to be here a while longer than planned." The baby dragon settled more comfortably against her, its colors shifting to soft, sleepy blues and greens. For the first time since it had awakened, it felt safe enough to rest. Sarah settled beside the crystal depression, prepared to wait as long as it needed. Outside the cave, Elder Thoraxis stood with Sarah's crew, his ancient eyes reflecting a mixture of surprise and approval. In all his centuries, he had never seen a human form a binding bond so quickly or so completely. Most species require days or weeks to establish such a connection. Perhaps there was more to these humans than their reputation suggested. Perhaps there was hope for a future where both species could coexist and learn from each other. But that would depend entirely on what happened in the days and weeks to come as human and dragon learned to understand each other's hearts. 3 days had passed since Sarah first entered the binding cave, and the world outside had transformed into a complex dance of diplomacy and logistics. The baby dragon, whom Sarah had started thinking of as Prism because of the way its scales caught and split the crystal light, refused to let her move more than a few feet away. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat cross-legged just outside the cave entrance, her portable laboratory spread around her like a technological garden. She'd been taking readings on the electromagnetic field that seemed to surround Sarah and Prism, documenting what she called the most significant xenobiological phenomenon in human history. The bond is strengthening, Elena reported to the others through her comm. The bioelectrical synchronization between Sarah and the young dragon is unlike anything in our databases. Their heartbeats are beginning to match rhythms. Neural activity patterns are showing convergent harmonics. Inside the cave, Sarah felt the truth of Elena's words in ways that science couldn't measure. Every hour that passed, the connection with Prism grew deeper and more complex. She could sense the little dragon's emotional state as clearly as her own, could feel its curiosity about the strange creature who had become its anchor to the waking world. Prism had grown more confident over the past few days. At first, it had remained curled in the crystal depression, venturing out only when Sarah coaxed it with gentle touches and soft words. Now it explored the immediate area around her, always staying close enough to touch, its large eyes constantly checking to make sure she was still there. "Tell me about dragon development," Sarah said to Elder Thyraxis, who had taken to visiting the cave entrance twice daily. The ancient dragon's presence seemed to calm Prism, though the young one still preferred Sarah's company above all others. Thyraxis settled his massive frame outside the cave, his scales shifting to contemplative grays and blues. "Our young ones spend their first century in the deep sleep, connected to the crystal matrices that provide both sustenance and protection. During this time, they absorb not just nutrients, but knowledge, the accumulated wisdom of our species, passed down through the living crystals themselves." "But Prism woke up early," Sarah observed. "What does that mean for its development?" "That is unprecedented," Thyraxis admitted. "Never in our recorded history has a young one awakened prematurely and survived the experience without severe psychological damage. The fact that it has bonded with you instead of retreating into catatonic withdrawal suggests something remarkable about both your species and our own." Sarah looked down at Prism, who is currently investigating a particularly interesting crystal formation with intense concentration. The little dragon had learned to project its emotions more clearly through their bond, and right now Sarah could feel its satisfaction at discovering that certain crystals produced different tones when touched. "What would have happened if I hadn't come in here?" she asked. "It would have died," Thyraxis said simply. "The terror of awakening alone, without the proper neural pathways established through the crystal matrix, it would have driven the young one into shock and eventual death. You saved its life by providing the emotional anchor it needed." Sarah felt a weight settle in her stomach. "And now I can never leave." "Not never," Thyraxis said carefully. "But the bond you have formed will require careful management. To simply disappear from the young one's life would cause trauma that could last centuries. Among our own people, binding bonds are considered sacred. They are formed only between parent and child, or between bonded mates who share their entire lives." "I'm not going to live for centuries," Sarah pointed out. "What happens when I die?" Thyraxis was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried undertones of grief that Sarah's translator struggled to interpret. "We do not know. This situation has no precedent in our history." Meanwhile, outside the immediate area of the cave, the rest of Sarah's crew struggled with the implications of their extended stay. Chief Engineer Martinez had managed to establish a small base camp with portable shelters and life support systems, but their supplies were limited and Earth Command was asking increasingly pointed questions about their mission status. Navigator Torres sat in the ship's communications bay, composing yet another delay report. "Command, this is Torres aboard the Prometheus. Captain Chun remains in communication with the local intelligent species regarding cultural and diplomatic protocols. We are operating under first contact guidelines and cannot provide a definitive timeline for mission completion at this time." It was technically true, Torres reasoned, even if it left out the part about their captain being emotionally bonded to a baby dragon and unable to leave without causing it potentially fatal psychological trauma. Back in the cave, Sarah was learning that young dragons were remarkably intelligent, even at their current stage of development. Prism had begun to understand some of her words, and, more importantly, had started projecting its own thoughts with increasing clarity. The mental images were simple at first, basic concepts like hunger, curiosity, contentment, or distress. But gradually, Sarah began to receive more complex communications. Prism showed her memories from its time in the deep sleep, not visual memories, but emotional ones. The sense of being connected to something vast and ancient, the comfort of belonging to a community, even while unconscious, the slow accumulation of knowledge that formed the foundation of dragon culture. You were learning while you slept, Sarah realized, speaking aloud as she often did. Prism seemed to find the vibrations of her voice soothing, even when it couldn't understand the words. All those months in the Crystal Matrix, you were absorbing the history of your people. Prism projected an image of agreement, along with something that felt like pride. Then, it shared something else, a sense of incompleteness, of knowledge that had been interrupted before it could be fully absorbed. The early awakening had left gaps in its education, things that other young dragons would know instinctively, but that Prism would have to learn through experience. Sarah felt a wave of protective anger. This baby had been deprived of its birthright because of their mining operation. The thought that their arrival had caused such disruption made her stomach turn. "We're going to figure this out," she promised, gently stroking the soft scales along Prism's neck. "Somehow, we'll make sure you get what you need." Prism curled closer against her, projecting emotions of trust and affection so strong that Sarah's eyes welled with tears. In just a few days, this little creature had become more important to her than anything else in her life. The thought of leaving it, of causing it pain, was unbearable. "Captain," Elena's voice came through the comm, interrupting the moment. "Elder Thyraxis wants to discuss something with you. He says it's important." Sarah coaxed Prism to the cave entrance, where the young dragon could see Elder Thyraxis but still remain close to her. The ancient dragon scales were cycling through patterns of deep contemplation, purples and golds that spoke of serious consideration. "I've been consulting with the other elders," Thyraxis began. "Your situation is unprecedented, but not without possible solutions. However, what I am about to propose will require sacrifice from both of our species." Sarah felt Prism press closer against her leg, picking up on the seriousness of the conversation, even if it couldn't understand the words. "What kind of solution?" "The young one needs to complete its education, the knowledge that was interrupted when it awakened prematurely. Among our people, this is normally provided through the crystal matrices during the deep sleep. But there's another way. Ancient dragon lore speaks of a ritual called the bridging, where knowledge can be shared directly between minds." "That sounds promising," Sarah said, though she could sense there was more coming. "The process requires 3 participants," Thyraxis continued. "The young one, a knowledge keeper who has mastered the information to be shared, and a bridge, someone who can connect the 2 minds and facilitate the transfer. The bridge bears the greatest burden, as they must open their mind completely and allow both the ancient knowledge and the young one's consciousness to flow through them." Sarah felt her blood chill. What are the risks to the bridge? Complete neural restructuring, permanent alteration of brain chemistry, and thought patterns. In some cases, the bridge's personality becomes so integrated with dragon consciousness that they can no longer function in their original society. Among our own people, those who serve as bridges in the ritual often choose to remain with the dragon communities permanently. The implications hung in the air like a sword. Sarah looked down at Prism, who was watching the conversation with intelligent eyes. Through their bond, she could feel the little dragon's growing distress as it picked up on the emotional undertones of the discussion. "There's no other way?" she asked. "None that would not result in significant psychological damage to the young one," Thyraxis confirmed. "And the bridging must be performed soon. The longer the interruption in its education continues, the more difficult it becomes to integrate the missing knowledge properly." Elena stepped forward from where she'd been monitoring the conversation. Sarah, you can't seriously be considering this. We don't know what kind of permanent effects this process might have on human neurology. You could lose yourself completely. Sarah knelt beside Prism, whose colors had shifted to worried blues and grays. The little dragon could sense the distress of the adults around it, and its confusion and fear were bleeding through their bond. She gently touched its neck, offering what comfort she could. What would happen to Prism if we don't do the ritual? She asked. It would survive, Thyraxis said carefully, but it would be forever cut off from the deeper aspects of our culture. It would be like a person raised without language or music or mathematics. Functional, but missing essential parts of what makes us who we are. Sarah closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision. Through her bond with Prism, she could sense its natural intelligence, its curiosity about the world, its capacity for wonder and joy. To condemn it to a life of incompleteness because she was afraid of what might happen to her own mind seemed unconscionably selfish. How long do we have to decide? She asked. 3 days, Thyraxis replied. After that, the neural pathways will have solidified too much for the bridging to be effective. Sarah nodded slowly. 3 days to decide whether to risk her own humanity to save a dragon child's future. 3 days to weigh her duty to her crew and her mission against the bond she'd formed with a creature she'd known for less than a week. 3 days to figure out what kind of person she truly was. Prism curled up against her, projecting feelings of trust and love that made Sarah's chest tight with emotion. Whatever happened, she would not let this little one down, even if it meant sacrificing everything she'd been to become something entirely new. The crystals around them pulsed with soft, comforting light, as if the cave itself was trying to provide reassurance. But Sarah knew that comfort was an illusion. In 3 days, everything would change, one way or another. The only question was how much of herself she was willing to sacrifice to protect the innocent creature that had already claimed her heart. The second night after Thyraxis' revelation, Sarah lay sleepless in her portable shelter, listening to Prism's soft breathing from the nest of thermal blankets they'd arranged beside her cot. The baby dragon had refused to sleep in the cave without her, and after some negotiation with Elder Thyraxis, they'd been allowed to set up a temporary shelter near the cave entrance. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities and consequences. Elena had spent the day researching everything they knew about human-alien neural integration, which wasn't much. The few documented cases involved technological interfaces rather than biological bridging, and none of them provided useful precedents for what Sarah was contemplating. Captain, Torres's voice came through her calm, barely above a whisper. We need to talk. Sarah carefully extracted herself from Prism's sleeping embrace, noting how the little dragon's colors immediately shifted to more restless patterns, even in sleep. Their bond had grown so strong that it could sense her emotional state even while unconscious. She met Torres outside the shelter, where the navigator stood looking up at the alien stars. What is it? Earth Command is losing patience, Torres said quietly. They've given us 72 more hours before they send a retrieval ship. Admiral Morrison is talking about court-martial proceedings if we don't provide a satisfactory explanation for our delays. Sarah felt her stomach drop. They can't just abandon a first contact situation. They can if they decide we've exceeded our authority. Torres turned to face her, his expression grim. Sarah, I've been with you for 8 years. I've never seen you hesitate when duty called. But this is different. That little dragon trusts me completely, Sarah said, looking back toward the shelter where Prism slept. It doesn't understand complex politics or chain of command. All it knows is that I'm the one thing standing between it and terror, and what happens to our duty to humanity. To Earth, we're supposed to be gathering resources to help save our planet, not playing nursemaid to alien babies. The words stung because they contained truth. Sarah had spent her entire career balancing competing priorities, making hard choices for the greater good. But this felt different. This wasn't just about following orders or completing missions. It was about fundamental questions of right and wrong. "What would you do, Miguel?" she asked. "If that was a human child in there, would the calculation be different?" Torres was quiet for a long moment. "That's not a fair question, Captain. It's not human. Does that matter? It's intelligent, it's innocent, and it's completely dependent on me for its psychological well-being. When did species membership become the deciding factor in basic compassion?" Before Torres could answer, Elena approached from the direction of the dragon settlement. She'd been spending time with the other elders, learning more about dragon culture and the bridging ritual. "Sarah," she said urgently, "I've learned something important about the bridging process. It's not just about knowledge transfer. It's about fundamental consciousness integration. The humans who underwent similar processes in dragon history, they didn't just change. They became something entirely new." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, though part of her already suspected. "The bridging creates a triple consciousness, human, dragon, and something that's neither and both. The person who emerges from the process retains memories of their human life, but their thought patterns, their emotional responses, their entire worldview becomes integrated with dragon consciousness. They can no longer function in purely human society." Sarah absorbed this information, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. "But they survive. They maintain their sense of self." "In a way. But Elena's point is valid," Torres interjected. "Sarah, if you go through with this, you won't be coming back to Earth. You won't be human in any meaningful sense. Your career, your life, everything you've built, it all ends." Sarah looked up at the alien stars, thinking about Earth's gray skies and crowded cities, about the mining quotas and resource wars that had driven humanity to the stars in search of salvation. Then she thought about Prism's absolute trust, its innocent joy in discovering new things, its complete dependence on her for emotional security. "Maybe," she said quietly, "that's not such a terrible thing." The next morning brought unexpected developments. A second dragon settlement had sent representatives, and Sarah found herself in the middle of what Elder Thyraxis explained was essentially a political crisis. "The Conservancy Council believes we should have prevented your ship from landing," Thyraxis explained, his scales cycling through agitated patterns of red and gold. "They argue that allowing humans to discover our hidden worlds will inevitably lead to exploitation and destruction." Elder Caraxis, the leader of the opposing faction, was younger than Thyraxis, but carried herself with an authority that spoke of significant influence. Her scales were predominantly silver with streaks of deep blue, and when she spoke, her voice carried undertones of barely controlled anger. "Your species has a reputation throughout the galaxy," Caraxis said, addressing Sarah directly. "Resource extraction, planetary exploitation, aggressive colonization. Why should we believe that you are different?" Sarah felt Prism press closer against her leg, picking up on the tension in the air. Through their bond, she could sense the little dragon's confusion and growing distress. It didn't understand the politics, but it could feel the hostility directed toward its bonded human. "Because I'm willing to sacrifice everything to protect one of your children," Sarah replied simply. "Judge me by my actions, not by the reputation of my species." Caraxis's scales shifted to deeper blues, indicating skepticism. "Words are easy, human. The bridging you contemplate is irreversible. If you undergo the ritual and then change your mind, if you decide that our ways are incompatible with your nature, the young one will suffer anyway." "Then don't let me change my mind," Sarah said, surprising everyone present, including herself. "If the bridging creates a triple consciousness, then that new being will understand both human and dragon perspectives. It will be committed to Prism's well-being in ways that transcend my current emotional attachment." Elder Thyraxis's scales brightened with what Sarah had learned to recognize as surprise and approval. "You would willingly sacrifice your individual consciousness for the well-being of our young." "I would evolve my consciousness to better serve an innocent creature that trusts me," Sarah corrected. "That doesn't feel like sacrifice. It feels like growth." The political debate continued for hours, with dragons arriving from multiple settlements to voice their opinions. Sarah listened to arguments about precedent and risk, about the dangers of human contact, and the unprecedented nature of interspecies bonding. Through it all, Prism remained close to her, occasionally projecting feelings of confusion and distress that made Sarah's protective instincts flare. It was Elena who provided the breakthrough, approaching the assembly with her tablet full of research data. "I've been analyzing the bioelectrical patterns between Sarah and the young dragon," she announced. "The integration is already beginning. Their neural patterns are synchronizing at the quantum level. Even if we wanted to reverse the bonding process, I don't think we could do it without severe trauma to both participants." Elder Caraxes turned her ancient eyes toward Elena. "Explain." "The bond they formed isn't just emotional, it's neurological. Their brain chemistries are adapting to each other. Sarah's neural pathways are already beginning to restructure to accommodate dragon consciousness patterns, and the young dragon's development is being guided by human cognitive frameworks. They're becoming something new together." Sarah felt a strange sense of inevitability settle over her. The choice had been made the moment she walked into that cave and saw a frightened baby dragon looking for comfort. Everything since then had been the natural consequence of that single moment of compassion. "How long until the process becomes irreversible?" Caraxes asked. "It already is," Elena said quietly. "Even if Sarah left now, the neural changes would continue. And the young dragon, it would never recover from the abandonment trauma. The bonding has progressed too far." A murmur went through the assembled dragons, scales shifting through patterns of surprise and concern. This changed everything. Sarah wasn't choosing to undergo the bridging. She was already in the process of becoming something new, and the ritual would simply complete what had begun naturally. Elder Thyraxis stepped forward, his massive form radiating ancient wisdom. "In 5,000 years of recorded history, we have never seen such rapid and complete bonding between species. Perhaps this is not an accident or a mistake. Perhaps this is evolution in action. Or perhaps," Caraxes countered, "it is a dangerous aberration that will lead to unforeseen consequences for both our species." Sarah looked down at Prism, who was projecting feelings of increasing distress as the debate continued. The little dragon could sense the conflict around it, could feel the uncertainty and fear of the adults, and it was beginning to retreat into itself the way it had during those first terrifying moments of premature awakening. "Stop," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the debate with unexpected authority. "All of you, just stop. Look at what you're doing to this child." She knelt beside Prism, gathering the trembling dragon against her chest. Through their bond, she could feel its terror that the arguing adults might somehow separate them, might take away the one source of comfort and security it had known in its short waking life. "This isn't about politics or precedent or species reputation," Sarah continued, her voice gentle but firm. "This is about a baby who's scared and confused and needs stability. You want to debate the implications of our bond? Fine, but do it somewhere else, away from the child you're terrifying with your arguments." The assembled dragons fell silent, their scales shifting to shades that Sarah had learned indicated shame and regret. Even Elder Caraxes looked chastened by the reminder that their debate was causing distress to the very being they were supposedly trying to protect. "You are right, human Sarah," Caraxes said finally. "We have allowed our concerns for the future to override our care for the present. The young one's immediate well-being must take precedence." Elder Thyraxis nodded agreement. "The bridging ritual will proceed tomorrow at dawn. We will deal with the larger implications afterward." Sarah felt Prism relax against her as the hostility in the air dissipated. Through their bond, she could sense the little dragon's relief and gratitude. Whatever she was becoming, whatever she was sacrificing, it was worth it to protect that innocent trust. Tomorrow, she would cease to be entirely human. Tomorrow, she would become something new and unknown. But tonight, she would hold a frightened dragon baby and promise it that everything would be all right. And for the first time since this all began, Sarah truly believed that promise was one she could keep. Dawn came with crystalline clarity on Kepler 442c, the binary star system casting dual shadows across the landscape that made everything look ethereal and otherworldly. Sarah stood at the entrance to what the dragons called the memory chamber, a vast cavern deep beneath the crystal formations where the accumulated knowledge of dragon civilization was stored in living mineral matrices. Prism clung to her side, its scales cycling through nervous patterns of yellow and green. The little dragon could sense the gravity of what was about to happen through their bond, even if it didn't fully understand the process. Through the connection they shared, Sarah could feel its confusion and underlying fear that this ritual might somehow change their relationship. "It's going to be all right," Sarah whispered, gently stroking the soft scales along Prism's neck. "We're going to be even closer afterward. You'll have all the knowledge you need, and I'll still be here to protect you." She hoped that was true. Elena's research had provided some insight into what the bridging process would entail, but there were still too many unknowns. Would she retain her memories? Her personality? Her capacity to love this small creature that had become the center of her universe? Elder Thyraxis emerged from the memory chamber, his ancient scales reflecting the morning light in patterns of solemn blue and silver. "The Knowledge Keeper is prepared," he announced. "Elder Vorthak has been chosen to serve as the conduit for the missing educational matrices." Sarah had met Vorthak the evening before, an ancient dragon whose specialization was early development and childhood education. Unlike the political figures who had debated the wisdom of the bridging, Vorthak had focused entirely on Prism's needs and the specific knowledge gaps that needed to be addressed. "The young one must enter the chamber first," Thyraxis explained. "The crystal matrices need to recognize and accept its neural patterns before the bridging can begin." Sarah knelt beside Prism, opening her mind to their bond as completely as she could. She projected feelings of love, protection, and absolute commitment, trying to communicate that no matter what changed about her, her devotion to Prism's well-being would remain constant. Prism responded with a flood of trust and affection so intense that Sarah's eyes filled with tears. Then, with a courage that made Sarah's heart swell with pride, the little dragon walked into the memory chamber. The chamber itself was breathtaking, a vast space carved from living crystal that pulsed with gentle bioluminescence. The walls were covered in formations that looked like frozen lightning, each one containing compressed knowledge that had been accumulated over millennia. At the center of the chamber was a raised platform with 3 indentations, one small enough for a dragon child, one size for an adult dragon, and one that would accommodate a human. Prism settled into the smallest depression with instinctive understanding, its scales immediately beginning to resonate with the frequency of the surrounding crystals. The matrices recognized the young dragon's neural patterns and began to glow more brightly, preparing to receive the consciousness that would guide the knowledge transfer. Elder Vorthak entered next, his massive form moving with the careful grace of extreme age. He settled into the largest depression, and immediately the chamber filled with harmonics that made Sarah's bones vibrate. This was the voice of accumulated wisdom, thousands of years of dragon civilization compressed into patterns of living sound and light. "Human Sarah," Thyraxis called from the chamber entrance. "It is time." Sarah took a deep breath and walked toward the platform. With each step, she could feel the pull of the crystal matrices, as if they were reaching out to examine her consciousness and judge her worthy of the task ahead. The sensation was not unpleasant, but it was profoundly alien, like having her thoughts gently probed by an intelligence vast and patient and utterly foreign. She settled into the human-sized depression and immediately felt the crystal's attention focus on her with startling intensity. Through her bond with Prism, she could sense the little dragon's excitement and anticipation. Through some other channel she was only beginning to perceive, she could feel Elder Vorthak's ancient presence, patient, wise, and deeply committed to the well-being of Dragon Young. The bridging begins now, Thyraxis announced from outside the chamber. Human Sarah, open your mind completely. Do not resist the integration. Elder Vorthak, begin the knowledge transfer. Young one, receive what is offered and allow the bridge to guide the process. The first sensation was like drowning in light. Sarah felt her consciousness expand beyond the boundaries of her physical brain, reaching out to touch both Prism's developing awareness and Vorthak's vast repository of knowledge. For a terrifying moment, she thought she might lose herself completely in the flood of alien thought patterns. But then, Prism's familiar presence anchored her, the bond they'd already formed serving as a lifeline in the chaos of expanding awareness. Through that connection, Sarah began to understand what was happening. She wasn't losing her identity. She was becoming a translator, a bridge between human and dragon consciousness that would allow ancient knowledge to flow into modern understanding. The knowledge came in waves. First, the fundamental concepts that all dragon children learned: how to regulate their body temperature through scale color changes, how to interpret the harmonics of crystal formations, how to project emotions and simple thoughts through bioelectrical fields. Sarah felt these abilities integrating into her own neural pathways, giving her direct experience of dragon sensory modalities she'd never imagined. Then came the deeper knowledge, dragon history stretching back millennia, philosophical concepts about the relationship between mind and matter, scientific understanding of how consciousness could interface directly with crystalline matrices. Sarah's human brain struggled to process information so far outside her species' normal parameters, but gradually new neural pathways formed to accommodate the alien concepts. Through it all, Prism served as both recipient and guide. The little dragon's developing consciousness helped Sarah understand how to adapt the ancient knowledge for a modern context, while Sarah's human perspective helped Prism make sense of concepts that would have been overwhelming for a young dragon mind to process alone. Hours passed, or perhaps days. Time had no meaning in the crystalline chamber, where consciousness flowed like water between three minds. Sarah felt herself changing at the most fundamental level, her human worldview expanding to accommodate dragon perspectives on reality, time, and the nature of existence itself. But through all the transformation, her love for Prism remained constant. If anything, it grew stronger as she gained deeper understanding of how rare and precious their bond truly was. She was not losing her humanity, she realized. She was expanding it to encompass new possibilities for connection and understanding. The process reached a crescendo when Vorthak began transmitting the most advanced concepts, the dragon understanding of how individual consciousness related to the cosmic patterns that governed all life. Sarah felt her awareness explode outward, touching the edges of something vast and magnificent that connected all living beings in an intricate web of mutual dependence and shared destiny. And then, gradually, the flow of knowledge began to slow. Sarah felt her consciousness settling back into more familiar patterns, but everything was different now. She could perceive reality through both human and dragon sensory modalities. She could feel the bioelectrical fields of living creatures around her. She could sense the harmonic patterns in the crystal formations that spoke of the planet's geological and biological history. Most importantly, her connection with Prism had evolved into something that transcended species boundaries. She could feel the little dragon's joy and wonder as it finally had access to the cultural knowledge it had been denied by its premature awakening. But more than that, she could sense how their bond had created something new, a hybrid consciousness that was neither fully human nor fully dragon, but something greater than either could achieve alone. The bridging was complete. Sarah opened eyes that could now perceive frequencies of light invisible to baseline humans. The crystal chamber pulsed with patterns of meaning that her enhanced consciousness could read like text. Elder Vorthak's massive form radiated satisfaction and approval, his scales cycling through patterns that spoke of a successful knowledge transfer. But it was Prism that commanded her attention. The little dragon had grown during the process, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. Its colors were more complex now, cycling through patterns that conveyed sophisticated concepts rather than simple emotions. When their eyes met, Sarah felt the full depth of their evolved bond. Prism was no longer just a frightened baby seeking comfort. It was a young dragon with access to its cultural heritage, its ancestral knowledge, and its destined place in dragon civilization. But it was also something more, a being whose consciousness had been shaped by human perspectives on curiosity, exploration, and individual achievement. "Thank you," Prism said, and Sarah realized with shock that she could understand the words directly, without translation. The little dragon's voice carried harmonics of gratitude and love that resonated through both her human emotional centers and her newly developed dragon sensory apparatus. "How do you feel?" Sarah asked, marveling at how natural it felt to project her thoughts through bioelectrical fields rather than relying solely on spoken words. "Complete," Prism replied. "I understand now who I am and where I come from, but I also understand that I am something new, shaped by both dragon knowledge and human perspective. We're something new together." Elder Vorthak stirred in his crystal depression, his ancient consciousness slowly withdrawing from the shared awareness they had created. "The bridging is successful," he announced, his mental voice carrying undertones of wonder. "But the result is unprecedented. You have not simply transferred knowledge. You have created a new form of consciousness entirely." Sarah helped Prism down from the platform, noting how the little dragon's movements were more confident now, informed by centuries of accumulated knowledge about dragon physiology and capabilities. But there was also something distinctly non-dragon about its curiosity and eagerness to explore, traits that Sarah recognized as fundamentally human in origin. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, directing the question to both Vorthak and Prism. "Now," Prism said, its mental voice carrying notes of excitement and determination, "we learn what we can become together." Sarah smiled, feeling a joy that encompassed both human satisfaction and dragon contentment. She was no longer entirely human, and Prism was no longer entirely dragon. But there was something wonderful together, a bridge between species that might represent the future of both civilizations. As they emerged from the memory chamber into the alien dawn, Sarah realized that she had found something far more valuable than the rare earth element her ship had come to mind. She had found a new way to be conscious, a new way to love, and a new way to serve something greater than herself. The tears that fell from her eyes were not tears of loss, but tears of joy at finally understanding why Prism had refused to let her go. The little dragon had seen possibilities that none of them had imagined, a future where two species could evolve together into something neither could achieve alone. And that future was just beginning. 6 months after the bridging, the mining ship Prometheus had been transformed into something that would have been unrecognizable to its original crew. What had once been a purely functional vessel designed for resource extraction now served as the first embassy between human and dragon civilizations, its hull decorated with crystal formations that allowed for enhanced communication between species. Sarah stood on the observation deck, watching as Prism practiced flight maneuvers above the crystalline forest below. The young dragon had grown considerably since the bridging, now roughly the size of a large horse, but retained the playful curiosity that had first endeared it to her. Through their evolved bond, she could feel its joy in movement, its delight in the complex aerodynamics that dragon flight required. But she could also sense deeper changes in Prism's consciousness. The knowledge integration had been successful beyond anyone's expectations. Prism now understood not just dragon culture and history, but had developed unique perspectives that blended dragon wisdom with human innovation. It had become something unprecedented, a bridge between worlds in the most literal sense. The orbital platform is almost ready, Elena reported, approaching from the communications array. The xenobiologist had volunteered to stay on Kepler 442c as part of the diplomatic mission, fascinated by the ongoing evolution of the human-dragon relationship. Earth Command is sending their first official delegation next month. Sarah nodded, still watching Prism's flight patterns. The young dragon was experimenting with formations it had learned from its inherited memories, but adapting them with modifications that drew on human understanding of physics and engineering. Even its flight had become a hybrid of dragon instinct and human innovation. "How are they taking the news about my transformation?" Sarah asked. Elena's expression grew complicated. Admiral Morrison is calling it an unprecedented diplomatic sacrifice. The scientific community is split between those who see it as a breakthrough in interspecies cooperation and those who consider it a dangerous precedent. But the politicians... She paused. "They're calling you a hero, Sarah. The first human to successfully bridge the gap between species through consciousness integration." Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions at that assessment. She was no longer entirely human, and calling her transformation a sacrifice felt inaccurate. She hadn't lost herself. She had become more than she had ever been before. Her consciousness now encompassed sensory modalities and thought patterns that no baseline human could experience. She could perceive the living network that connected all the crystal formations on the planet, could sense the emotional states of creatures through bioelectrical emanations, could communicate through harmonics that carried far more information than spoken language. "And the dragons?" Sarah asked. "How are their communities adapting?" "Better than expected," Elena replied. Elder Thyraxis has been working with the other settlements to establish protocols for human contact. The Conservancy Council is still skeptical, but even Elder Caraxis admits that the results of your bridging have exceeded their most optimistic projections. Through the window, Sarah watched as Prism suddenly changed direction, soaring back toward the ship with excitement radiating through their bond. She could sense that the young dragon had discovered something important during its flight. Prism landed on the observation deck with graceful precision, its scales cycling through patterns of urgent communication. "Sarah," it said, using the harmonic speech they had developed together, "I have found something that you need to see." "What is it?" Sarah asked, automatically shifting to the bioelectrical communication mode that allowed for much more complex information exchange. What Prism shared through their link made Sarah's breath catch. During its flight over the northern crystal formations, the young dragon had discovered evidence of something unprecedented, a natural crystalline matrix that seemed to be evolving on its own, developing patterns that resembled the consciousness interface structures found in the memory chambers. "It's as if the planet itself is learning from our presence," Prism explained, its mental voice carrying undertones of wonder and excitement. "The crystal formations are adapting, creating new structures that could facilitate communication between different forms of consciousness." Sarah felt her enhanced awareness reaching out to examine what Prism had discovered. Through their shared consciousness, she could perceive the faint bioelectrical signatures that indicated organized development in the crystalline network. It was as if their successful bridging had inspired the planet itself to evolve new possibilities for interspecies connection. "Elena," Sarah called to the xenobiologist, "you need to see this. Prism has found evidence that our presence here is catalyzing planetary-scale evolution." Elena immediately activated her portable scanning equipment, her scientific excitement palpable. "If what you're describing is accurate, this could change everything we understand about consciousness and planetary evolution. The implications for both human and dragon civilization would be enormous." Over the following days, teams of both human scientists and dragon elders investigated the crystalline formations that Prism had discovered. What they found exceeded even their expanded expectations. The planet's crystal network was indeed evolving, developing new structures that could facilitate consciousness integration not just between humans and dragons, but potentially between any species capable of bioelectrical communication. It's as if Kepler 442c is becoming a living laboratory for consciousness evolution, Dr. Elena explained during a joint briefing with Earth Command and the Dragon Council. The successful bridging between Sarah and Prism seems to have activated dormant potential in the planetary crystal network. Elder Thyraxis, participating in the briefing through the crystal communication system they had established, projected patterns of profound contemplation. This confirms theories that our ancient philosophers proposed, but could never test. They believed that consciousness was not confined to individual minds, but was a fundamental property of the universe that could manifest in various forms: biological, technological, and geological. Admiral Morrison's voice came through the communication array from Earth, carrying undertones of both excitement and concern. Captain Chun, or should I say Ambassador Chun, what are your recommendations for proceeding? This discovery has implications far beyond our original mining mission. Sarah looked out at the landscape, where Prism was flying with a group of other young dragons, their formations creating complex harmonic patterns that resonated through the crystal networks. Through her enhanced consciousness, she could perceive the planet itself responding to their presence, evolving new structures that might someday allow for communication between species they hadn't even encountered yet. I recommend that we establish Kepler 442c as a permanent research and diplomatic center, Sarah said. Not for resource extraction, but for consciousness research and interspecies cooperation. This planet is teaching us new ways to connect across the boundaries of biology and culture. We can't afford to lose this opportunity. And the mining rights? Morrison asked. Sarah felt Prism's presence touch her mind, sharing the young dragon's perspective on the Admiral's question. Through their bond, she could sense the complex web of life that connected every crystal formation, every tree, every living being on the planet. The idea of strip mining such a system for simple resource extraction seemed not just short-sighted, but actively destructive to possibilities that could benefit all conscious life. The planet's true value isn't in its mineral deposits, Sarah replied. It's in what it can teach us about consciousness and evolution. The knowledge we could gain here is worth more than any amount of rare earth elements. Elder Caraxis joined the conversation, her mental voice carrying new notes of respect and approval. The human Sarah speaks wisdom. Our young ones who have studied with her hybrid consciousness are developing capabilities we never thought possible. They can perceive reality through multiple sensory modalities, can communicate across species boundaries, can interface with technological systems through bioelectrical fields. What are you saying? Morrison asked. I'm saying that the bridging was just the beginning, Sarah explained. Prism and I have proven that consciousness can evolve across species boundaries. But what we're discovering now suggests that consciousness itself might be evolving on a planetary scale. We could be witnessing the birth of a new form of intelligence that encompasses multiple species, technological systems, and geological processes. Through her bond with Prism, Sarah could feel the young dragon's excitement and agreement. They had become partners in an exploration that was revealing new possibilities for life and consciousness that neither of their species had imagined alone. The tears I cried when I first understood why Prism wouldn't let me go, Sarah continued. They weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of joy at finally understanding the future we could create together. Prism saw what I couldn't, that our bond was the first step towards something magnificent. As if summoned by her words, Prism landed on the observation deck, its scales cycling through patterns of love and excitement. Through their shared consciousness, Sarah felt the young dragon's absolute certainty that they had made the right choice. We are not the same beings who first met in that crystal cave, Prism said, its harmonic voice carrying undertones of profound satisfaction. We're something new, something better. And We are just the beginning. Sarah reached out to touch Prism's neck, feeling the familiar warmth and the not-so-familiar bioelectrical connection that now linked their consciousness permanently. Through that touch, she could sense not just Prism's thoughts, but the vast network of crystalline intelligence that was awakening across the planet's surface. The tears that fell from her eyes now were tears of wonder at the magnificent future they were helping to create. Humanity and dragon civilization would both be transformed by what they learned here. But more importantly, consciousness itself was evolving into new forms that might someday span the stars. Prism had refused to let her go because it had seen this future, a tomorrow where the boundaries between species, between individual minds, between biological and technological intelligence would become permeable and collaborative rather than fixed and competitive. And as Sarah looked out at the crystalline landscape that pulsed with new forms of awareness, she knew that this was only the beginning of the most important journey either of their species had ever undertaken. The baby dragon had become a bridge between worlds, and that bridge was becoming a pathway to possibilities neither species could have imagined alone. The tears Sarah had cried in understanding were nothing compared to the joy of participating in the birth of a new form of consciousness that might someday connect all intelligent life in the galaxy. The future they were creating together was worth every transformation, every sacrifice, every moment of uncertainty they had endured. And it was just beginning to unfold.